And my doctors were right. I was extremely ill from this and should not have survived at all, and should not have had any experience at all, much less any memories of experience. And that's one of the reasons why my story has captivated the scientific and medical worlds by storm, is because I had an unbelievably robust, hyper-real experience that I'm going to describe to you in some detail. And it should never have happened, according to everything that we know. Now, when I did come back, my brain was wrecked. No words, no language, no recognition of any of those beings around the hospital bed. My mother, sisters, sons. Absolutely no clue what this universe was. But I knew where I'd been. I remembered completely, full well, the journey I was returning from, even though I remembered absolutely nothing during any part of it of Eben Alexander's life before coma. No words, no language, none of the religious concepts, certainly none of the knowledge of all those years spent in neurosurgery studying brain, mind, and consciousness. Every bit of that was completely deleted for this entire experience, which makes it a little bit atypical when you look at other near-death experiences. But I was amnesic for the life of Eben Alexander, and it took me many months to even begin to glimpse how and why that might have been the case. My default understanding early on was that, well, of course, I had this severe bacterial meningitis that destroyed the neocortex, the human part of my brain. So it made perfect sense that I didn't have any memories or knowing of my life before coma. Turns out the reasons for it go quite a bit deeper than that. But that was my working model for a long time, that such a severe neocortical destruction would erase all the memories. But it turns out that that set the stage for a very powerful journey with tremendous lessons in it. Now, what I knew full well when I came back was the entire journey. That journey started in a place that I call the earthworm's eye view. Very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm, like being underground or in dirty jello. I remember this sensation of lots of roots or blood vessels around me. And almost I can feel them just thinking about what it was like, and I could sense them way off into the distance. Although I had no body image at any point of this journey. I was just a piece of awareness experiencing all this. But in that coarse, horrible, ugly underground realm that was completely unresponsive, even though I had no words, no language, I could still wonder, what, where? But never a flicker of response to that curiosity. Now, many, when I would give these talks early on, they would say, well, was that earthworm's eye view, which is what I call that ugly underground realm where everything began, was that hell or purgatory? I would think hell would be at least a little bit interactive. And this was none of that. That curiosity was never answered with any flicker of anything. In looking back on it, I think that that very coarse, primitive, murky existence was the very best consciousness my physical brain could muster when it was soaking in pus and being destroyed by this primitive E. coli infection. Now, it turns out that if you would ask me before my coma, well, if that primitive earthworm eye view is what your brain is mustering right now with this devastating infection as it progresses and melts the outer surface, the human part of your brain, what's the next step? I would have told you, well, obviously, the next step is a state of no awareness at all. That is the biggest shock of the journey, is that, in fact, as this all progressed, and it did seem that that earthworm eye view went on for eons, because I promise you, I had no memory moment to moment of time. I had absolutely zero memory of my life before coma, not a tiniest bit. And so it did seem to go on for a very long time. The good news, it did not last forever. And what happened next was this slowly spinning white light that came towards me, a very clear and pure light that had fine white and gold tendrils off of it. And this white light came towards me, and the best part about it is it came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And it turns out that I had been aware of sound in that earthworm eye view, that very primitive existence. The sound was a pounding, monotonous sound, like someone smashing on an anvil over and over again. Just a steady rhythm. And it was a very cursing sound. And yet, as this pure white light came towards me, it was coming with this perfect musical melody, absolutely beautiful. And as you will hear, sound, music, vibration, frequency is the way that our souls transcend in these levels. It's one of the reasons why sound, hymns, chants have been used for thousands of years to help engender deep transcendental conscious states in any kind of spiritual broadening of consciousness, religious ceremony, etc. And that sound is absolutely essential to the work I do now. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but that melody, spinning melody as I called it, came towards me, and it opened up like a rip in that ugly earthworm eye view, and it was a rip that opened up into this brilliant, ultra-real valley. And I remember ascending up into this valley, up into this brilliant greenery, lush with life, absolutely fertile. And I had no body awareness, but I was moving up through it because I was a speck on a butterfly wing. Now, this was not a butterfly like some entomologist here on Earth can give you genus and species. This was the real deal. And butterflies in that realm, just like we often have dragonflies, butterflies, and hummingbirds that are messengers from that realm, from souls of the departed loved ones. And there are thousands of stories out there. I'm sure there's some in this room about that very phenomenon. But in that realm, butterflies are far more powerful and amazing than they are in this realm. And I was a speck of awareness, and it turns out on this wing of this butterfly, this was one of millions of butterflies, and they were looping and swirling in this beautiful river of love and color and life beyond description. And I remember how we would dip down and go through that lush greenery, and there would be flowers and blossoms, buds on trees that would open up even as we flew by. I remember the rich textures and colors beyond the rainbow. And so beautiful. And in that beautiful valley, as we would come up and ascend above all that greenery, I could see that there were hundreds of souls dancing. And when I wrote it all up weeks later, as I came back to this world and was trying to record the whole experience, I described them as being dressed in peasant garb, very simple clothing, yet beautiful colors, and tremendous joy and merriment. And there were lots of children playing and dogs jumping, and it was just a wonderful festival. And it was all being fueled because up above, in the velvety black skies above, were pure spiritual beings, orbs of golden light, swooping and swirling in formation, leaving sparkling golden trails, emanating these hymns, chants, anthems, powerful like a tsunami wave, crescendo after crescendo after crescendo of the most beautiful music, waves washing through me. And that's what was fueling this incredible joy and mirth going on in this Gateway Valley, as I came to call it. Now, the important thing to understand is that that Gateway Valley was much more real than this world. Far sharper, crisper, and more real than this. This is very dreamlike by comparison. That was a deep, deep mystery to me for a long time, trying to understand that ultra reality. It's very hard to put it into words. And when I would first describe that to people and talk about the ultra reality, people would say, well, is that like high-def TV? Well, it's a lot more than that. The way we know things there, you don't see with the eyes, you don't hear with the ears, you become others to feel the emotional power of existence. In fact, often if you get into the near-death experience literature, you read a lot about the tens of thousands of life reviews that people describe. You know that old saying, your life flashes before your eyes? Well, it's very true, and that's what near-death experiencers tell you, is that you go through every bit of your life, all the crucial parts that are there to teach you about the lessons of good and bad that are still residual lessons for you to learn, to help you and your higher soul and your soulmates, your soul group. And the judgment is not by any higher power, it's by our higher soul. That's what's doing the judging in that realm. And that's when we go through those life reviews. It's not some vague sepia-tinted memory. These are sharp, clear, crisp, absolute reliving the events more powerfully than when we live through them in the earthly realm. And we have to feel the power of our decisions, the emotional impact on our fellow beings. So if we lived a life handing out pain and suffering to others, we have to feel that in that life review. But we have to feel it far more sharply than they felt it here in the material realm, which is a pale, dim reflection of that far more real and crisp world of that gateway realm, of the realm between lives, where we reunite with our higher souls and where we reunite with our soul mates. And in the glaring, beautiful, all-loving light of that infinitely powerful God, that is the setting in which we relive those events and then plan our next incarnations for coming back in. But it is a very crisp ultra-reality. This is all about those lessons that we're here to learn. And the coin of that realm is love. That unconditional love that goes far beyond the phrase, far beyond those words. And of course, so many who have had near-death experiences and shared death experiences and other similarly spiritually transformative experiences know exactly what that's all about, that unconditional love. And the reason it's so important for all of us to get is because we're here in Soul School to learn those lessons of that love. And what we find is that that unconditional love has infinite power to heal. And I came from my journey to see that the hardships and difficulties in this life, and I promise you as a neurosurgeon, as a doctor, that very much includes illness and injury. They are gifts. They are opportunity for growth of our souls. We are all here as members of soul groups to do this growing. And when I talk about soul mates, I'm not just talking about that love of your life. I also came to see that often those who I'd seen before my coma as my nemesis, as someone who was in my way, preventing me from getting something I wanted in this life, often is a very near and dear soul mate. And I came to see the power of that love, that unconditional love, to heal. It heals the individual, it heals the soul group, it heals all of humanity, it heals life all around this world, and it heals consciousness throughout this universe, because there are many sentient beings in many civilizations throughout all of eternity, throughout this universe. This is a much bigger party than I might have ever thought before. And this is all part of our joining that much bigger awareness and knowing of consciousness in its grandest sense. Now, it turns out that in that beautiful Gateway Valley, that ultra-real valley on that beautiful butterfly wing, the best part about it, I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful girl, and I promise you it doesn't get better than that. And it turns out, I'll never forget the way she was sitting, the way she was dressed, the way she looked at me. And she looked at me with this very loving smile that transcends any of our words of love and our uses of romantic love or the love of parent and child, any of the kind of love that we have here, love for all of humanity. This is the love that transcends it all, is that unconditional love that we encounter there. People who have near-death experiences, even if all they do is touch briefly, glimpse that unconditional love, it changes their life forever. So don't let the simplicity of that phrase lead you astray. It is infinitely powerful. It's something that we all know because all of our souls have been there before and go back, and we cycle through again and again in our ascent. Now, another thing that's very important to understand is that time flow in that gateway realm is very different from time flow here. That's one of the reasons why those life reviews, the memories are not just vague memories, but very strong, powerful learning opportunities where the goods and bads of our life and what we've done to others, feeling the impact of our decisions on others, is so hyper-real. And we go through it, like they say, flashes before your eyes. And the amazing thing is it doesn't take anything of Earth time. It could happen in a second, or it could take a century to unfold. It doesn't matter. Because time flow and causality in that realm is a much higher order than in this realm. And that's why often when I talk about reincarnation, some people get a little worried and say, well, wait a minute, what if the love of my life gets tired of waiting for me and they reincarnate before I get there? I promise you that doesn't happen. Because this is really all about love, and it's all about the relationships that we have. This is all about learning in soul school and growing as we do. And there's nothing more complex than knowing that it's simply by following a pathway that is one of manifesting that love as best we can. Love is the coin of that realm. And the more we can serve as conduits of that love, because our very consciousness is a direct, absolute connection to the divine, infinite healing power of that all-loving source. And by serving as conduits for that and allowing the love to come through us to our fellow beings, to show compassion, forgiveness, mercy, acceptance, that's all that matters. And that's what these lessons are all about. And that's how our souls ascend, is by getting closer and closer to that perfection of that love and ascending towards that oneness with the divine. Now, it turns out that this beautiful girl on the butterfly wing, as I said, she never said a word. She didn't have to. Her thoughts came straight into my awareness. Now, of course, I had no words or language, so it was pure conceptual flow. But when I wrote it all up a few weeks later, when I came back to this world, I put those thoughts down that had come to me directly from her with that all-loving smile. And this is, in my view, the central message of Proof of Heaven. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You will be taken care of. And nothing to fear is very, very critical, because I saw very much, in my view, how this was not a battle between good and evil, between light and darkness. In fact, there's plenty of evil and darkness in this world, but it's not a force that is against love and light of that infinitely powerful Creator. We simply serve as channels to bring that love and light into this world, and it displaces the darkness and evil. The darkness and evil are plenty real in this material realm, and you can also encounter them in those lower spiritual realms, such as I did in that earthworm eye view. The important thing to remember is when you know and fully know that you are a divine, eternal, spiritual being directly connected to that all-powerful creative deity, you have nothing to fear. And that is all you need to know. When you believe that and know that, it enables you to bring that lightness and love into this world in the face of darkness and evil as we perceive it here, and to do so in those spiritual realms and ascend higher and higher towards that oneness with the divine, with the soul group, and all that our souls are doing to ascend to those levels. Now, it turns out that there was another message that she gave me in addition to these messages of unconditional love. And this is one, in retrospect, I wish I had embellished on a little more in the book. You can do no wrong. And of course, I get in a little bit of hot water over that one when people just get to the book and read that far and they go, wait a minute, we can do wrong down here. Well, the reality is she meant it. You can do no wrong, as long as we realize that we reap what we sow. If we hand out pain and suffering to others as part of the lessons we're trying to learn, we're going to end up either making amends in this incarnation or having to live through the pain and suffering on their behalf in that life review. There is no need for an eternal hell. And in fact, that life review provides plenty of impetus for us to learn the lessons of that love and then plan that next incarnation with our soulmates and come back in here. But you can do no wrong, knowing full well that we are here to learn and teach those lessons with our soulmates. And again, the lessons have everything to do with that love, have to do with knowing that we are eternal spiritual beings through multiple incarnations. And for those of you who grew up like I did in a Christian faith, I promise you there's a tremendous amount in original Christianity that fully supports reincarnation. And I, believing as I did before my coma that brain creates consciousness, I'd never paid any attention to the near-death experience literature. I also did not realize that there's a very strong scientific literature on past life memories in children. In fact, the arch skeptic and scientist Carl Sagan admitted that one of the features of what he called psi, or paranormal phenomena, that had way too much evidence and demanded a much deeper explanation was past life memories in children and the evidence that it brings for reincarnation. A lot of that work has been done by the group at University of Virginia, and Karen Newell and I work a lot with that group now, and some of the work we do with sacred acoustics. But it turns out that the work of Ian Stevenson and more recently of Jim Tucker about past life memories in children fully brings out the reality of that. That reincarnation is real. Then you have to go and explain, well, how in the world does that happen? It clearly defies that simplistic kindergarten level thinking of brain creates consciousness. So you can bet there's some major pushback from neuroscientists who are materialists in their beliefs. But in fact, it's very real. And this is a big part of understanding. It's also very consistent, as I said, with early Christianity, with the original teachings, especially if you start to get into the Gnostic Gospels. And there are also reasons why, even though it is mentioned that John the Baptist was a reincarnation of Elijah the prophet, it has not been brought out as much in the New Testament, but in some of the other Gnostic Gospels and other early sources. It's a very profound reality. And yet there are reasons why that whole concept of reincarnation was kind of squashed by the Council of Nicaea and by others who were trying to control people's minds over the millennia. Now, it turns out that on that beautiful butterfly wing with this lovely girl, there was yet more to come, and that had to do with those angelic choirs above. I've told you, music, sound, vibration, frequency, that's what allows our souls to ascend and transcend to higher and higher levels in those spiritual realms. And what I remember is all of that collapsing down. The material world, this four-dimensional space-time collapsing down. That deeper time of causality in that gateway, that beautiful galley, the Gateway Valley, where we often are between lives, collapsing down, that higher causality, all of that collapsing down, until I finally emerged into this realm that I call the core. Infinite, inky blackness, filled to overflowing with infinite, unconditional love of that Creator, all through eternity and infinity and higher dimensional space. And in that beautiful, all-powerful, infinite love, there was also this brilliant orb of light, brighter than 1,000,000 stars, that I remember being there and I thought that it was somehow serving as an interpreter or translator. A very strong sense of the three of us being there, of that infinite, all-loving, creative power, far beyond any naming, far beyond any description. And yes, that deity has no gender. Oprah asked that question, just in case that one's out there. No, that deity has no gender, is completely beyond any words or description. And that's why I think that orb of light was there. Now, all of what I'd seen collapsing down, higher dimensional space-time, those spiritual realms, every bit of that was like this very complex oversphere that was there as part of the lessons. And when I entered that core realm, I was told, now not in words, this is pure conceptual flow, you're not here to stay. We'll teach you many things. You'll be going back. And I hope you understand by now that when I say the three of us, you know, this infinite, all-powerful creative source and that orb of light and my conscious awareness, this was consciousness far beyond the limited consciousness of Eben Alexander. This was the consciousness we all share, far deeper, far more profound. A direct link to divine, which is in each and every one of us. And you don't have to have a near-death experience to come to know this. Deep meditation and centering prayer, that's why I do so much of the work with sacred acoustics, is to help take that to the next level and help people to meditate in a much deeper fashion, because that is how we can come to know these much deeper truths. Now, it turns out that in the midst of so many lessons there in that core realm, I would then inexplicably pop back into that earthworm eye view. That was a real shocker. How in the world did that happen? I'd go right back to square one, to that very primitive, ugly underground with the roots and blood vessels around me. But I very quickly came to realize that by remembering the musical notes of the melody, and I would go through those notes in my mind and go through them like a chant, and by going through those musical notes, that spinning white light would come back and would come towards me and would open again like a rip in that fabric, and I'd re-enter that beautiful Gateway Valley on the butterfly wing with that lovely girl and all the souls dancing below, all the joy and merriment, and the same reassurance of unconditional love from her every time. And then those beautiful swooping orbs of light above, which I came to call in my writings angelic choirs. It was clear that's exactly what they were. And yet, once again, that music from those swooping orbs would generate this portal, and I would go swirling on up through higher and higher as all this collapsed down, back into that core realm, always assured you're not here to stay. You'll be going back, but we'll teach you many things. And I cycled through several times. I don't know how many. But then there came a time, I'd even come to believe that back was back to the earthworm eye view. So, no worry. I knew that all I had to do was remember the notes of the spinning melody. And that was my ticket back up into that beautiful, ultra-real Gateway Valley, and then through the angelic choirs to higher and higher realms and back into the core. But as you can imagine, they weren't kidding. And so there came a time when the notes of the melody no longer worked. I could no longer conjure up that beautiful, spinning, pure light that had been my gateway, my portal up into that gateway realm. And to say I was sad is an understatement. Because, in fact, when those gates to heaven were closed, sadness there, emotions are extremely powerful in that realm. To imagine monsoon rains throughout all of eternity, you can begin to touch on it. But in fact, I also knew by that point that I could trust. I would be taken care of, that I could do nothing wrong, that I was infinitely loved by that all-powerful deity, beyond all description. And in that core realm, I remember the one thing I brought back that I could really bring back to this world was the sound that I heard there. I've told you how sound and vibration are so important in all of this. Well, in that core realm with that infinite inky blackness, that all-loving, all-powerful deity beyond any naming, I heard that sound of Om, that eternal resonance of all of infinity and eternity. That deep Om sound was what I called that deity when I came back. Because to me, when I was writing this all up a few weeks after my coma, the word God was way too puny a little human word. And I realized that that deity was far beyond any kind of naming or description. That's why, for me, the word Om had no baggage at all. I'd never heard of its use as a mantra in some of the Eastern meditative traditions and that kind of thing. So Om is what I call that deity. Om made perfect sense to me. It was only much later that I came to realize, people alerted me, that Om actually was a sound that had a lot to do with other religious and spiritual traditions. Now, in this, when I was locked out, when I found that the melody, remembering the notes of the melody no longer worked to get me into that beautiful idyllic realm. As I said, I was very sad, but I knew I could trust I would be taken care of. And I remember at that point seeing thousands of beings around me in this very kind of misty, murky existence, going all around me, these beings. And they were all kneeling, some with hoods, many with candles, and there was this murmuring energy coming up from them. And the thing that was so shocking is that murmuring energy brought the very same all-loving feeling that I'd come to know in the gateway realm and in the core with that unconditional love of the Creator. And I remember how comforting that was, and all these beings going off around me. And I remember when I wrote all that up a few weeks later, I said what those beings were doing was praying. That's what I was feeling, was the power of that prayer, and how prayer can actually bring the power of that realm right into this realm and can help in our healing, especially when we come to realize that we are eternal spiritual beings, and if we can learn the lessons that the illness or injury is here to teach us, that sometimes there's a way that we are meant to recover from that illness. And that is, of course, the deeper lesson of my healing, because I spent several years completely mystified. My doctors to this day will tell you they have no explanation whatsoever for how I had a complete recovery within about 3 months when they were basically certain I had no chance of recovery at all, other than surviving for a few months and then dying. And for those who want to hear more about that, I often steer people to that beautiful book that helped me to start glimpsing how this healing can happen. It's a book by Anita Moorjani. It's called Dying to Be Me. A very powerful book, and she had a stage 4B non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and by all accounts should have been dead within hours of hitting an emergency room in Hong Kong back in 2006. And yet she had a profound near-death experience, and when she made a decision to come back, she knew that her cancer would disappear, and that's exactly what happened. And it was reading her book that I first started to glimpse some of what is at the core of the lesson here about healing and how we can sometimes manifest physical healing in this incarnation. So it turns out, though, that in that realm, all these beings around me, I saw the power of that prayer. I could feel the love and energy of that and how that was coming to comfort my return, and I didn't know where I was returning to. Now, I then saw 6 faces. And the 6 faces are very important. They would kind of bubble up out of the muck around me. And they would say some words. And then they would disappear again. Now, I didn't understand any of the words. My brain was very wrecked. And I just didn't understand. It was a lot like if you've seen Charlie Brown's Christmas Story when the adults talk, wah, 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 wah. It was the same kind of thing. And I remember seeing them, but the faces, I mean, I can remember to this day exactly what they looked like and how they kind of wiggled around. And it turns out within a few hours of waking up from coma, I was able to identify them all. But I had no idea who they were when I was in coma and first experienced them. Now, they were very important. 5 of them were physically there when I was in the last 18 hours of my coma experience before I started waking up. And that was very important because, in fact, that happened at the very far end of a journey that seemed to have gone on for months or even years. And yet it had to fit within 7 Earth days. But that's important because later on when I was trying to explain all this, and my original default was this had to be some crazy brain effect, some wild hallucination or drug effect or dream. That's what I was trying to explain it as, but that's why the meningitis was such a gift. As we went deeper and deeper into trying to explain it, and I went over this with my doctors, went over all my scans and medical records, we came to realize, well, it seemed way too real to be real, as I described it to my older son, Eben IV, who was majoring in neuroscience at the time. When he came home from school 2 days after I got out of the hospital, I told him it was way too real to be real, because it was. And to me, that meant it had to be a trick of the dying brain. But after many, many months and going over all this with my doctors and everything, we came to realize, well, it was way too real to be real because it really happened. But it didn't happen in my brain, and it didn't happen in the physical universe. It was a much deeper clue about the nature of all existence, and in many ways confirmed tens of thousands of other near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences, not to mention the writings of religious mystics and prophets and those writing about the afterlife going back thousands of years, because we're all talking about the same thing.